waste your life, don't toss it away. You can know your life today. Yield to God, let him have his way. Don't waste your life, my friend. You will lose in the end. Life is so short. The years slip by. What have you gained at the end? When years have flown and you look back, what will you see, my friend? Without the Lord, you get nothing at all. Life's been achievements, but credit for Don't waste your life, don't toss
Well,
it away.
indeed, don't waste your life or your morning. Listen to Presbycast, and that British invasion Christian rock from the 60s is your clue that we are joined. Also, the early hour that we're joined by gentlemen from across the pond, where it's 11. It's a little after 11 a.m., and they're probably already getting ready for lunch. How are you, brothers?
Very well, thank you.
All right, so we're joined by, that's the voice of William J.U. Phillip, minister of the historic, continuing, I guess we could say, Tron Church. And then there's Paul Levy, who said something on the recent Irreverent podcast that really spoke to me. He talked about the weirdos and the misfits in Presbyterian churches. And I always say there's no weird like Reformed weird. So you can use that, and I'm going to use your saying. It's good to go. It's good to know that it's universal. This
Yes.
Reformed weirdness. But anyway, I followed Paul for a long time. They have a congregation of the International Presbyterian Church in Ealing. Now, tell me, is Ealing West London or west of London?
No, it's West London. So
Okay.
It's kind of suburb, but still part of London. So yeah.
All right. And Dr. Phillip, tell us a little bit about just a couple of minutes, the sort of illustrious history of the Tron Church, which is in Glasgow and was until 2012 in the Church of Scotland.
Yeah, well, many of your listeners, I guess, will know of some of the my predecessor ministers at the Tron Church. Probably Eric Alexander will be a name known to many. He was there for 20 years until the late 90s. Then Sinclair Ferguson was the minister there for about 5 years prior to me. I've been there since 2004, and as you rightly say, we were until 2012 still part of the Church of Scotland, and then we had to leave that denomination after a long period of struggles over well-known departure from the historic faith and stance on the scriptures, culminating in the issue, came to a head over the issue of homosexual unions and marriage and so on. But it was part of a long period of departure, really, where a number of churches, over 20 churches, and many other ministers at that time, over the period of a year or two, ended up having to make that break. But we've remained in the city centre of Glasgow. We've now gained two other campuses, I guess you would call it, two other buildings, one in the west of the city, one in the south, and so we continue unabated and uninterrupted, and we're very thankful to God. He's not departed from us, and we continue our ministry just in the same way as before, with all the same distinctives of expository preaching and training for ministry.
And you're essentially an independent church now, although you do have some accountability structures. Do you have plans to
You've just frozen on me there, but
I don't really opportunity. You must know.
become a connected No, you can continue. Yes.
Yeah, we are. We're still we're part of a small presbytery with some other churches around Scotland who also left the Church of Scotland same time as us, and so we're not independent. We're part of a presbytery in that sense, but it's very small and I suppose less structured than the more historic denominations have been.
Oh, well, that's I do know a lot. Of course, everyone over here knows Sinclair Ferguson. My own church has my pastor knows him, and we've used his Ligonier materials and books and all that. So certainly, he's well known in the U.S. Of course, we know about his pastorate in South Carolina, and he's about as well known as any American Presbyterian is well known. Paul, tell us about your unusual church there in far west London.
So our congregation grew out of the work of Francis and Edith Schaeffer with L'Abri in the 1950s, and then Francis Schaeffer's son-in-law, Ranald Macaulay, he moved to Ealing to start an English branch of L'Abri in the late 60s. And so our congregation has been in existence for nearly 60 years. And yeah, we would be a local church family in the main. It would be, and we'd probably have about 40 nationalities. We're not a big church. We're about 160, 170. So yeah, it's like any local church should be, full of characters and misfits and all sorts. So I've been there since 2003, and we're part of the International Presbyterian Church, which is again a small denomination, probably 12 or 13 churches in the UK.
With the name International, do all the IPC churches have an emphasis to ministering to international people?
The kind of vision behind it was Schaeffer felt that national churches was a mistake of the Reformation, and so he wanted a kind of church which spanned kind of across the borders. It's arguable whether that's been successful. I suppose each congregation, it would, Britain is far more international than the US from what I've seen, particularly the South. And so in most congregations in Britain, there would be a considerable international element. Certainly within Willie's congregation in Glasgow, there is. I just think it's probably a more prominent part of the culture, and so it's a more prominent part of churches.
All right, we talked to Harrison Perkins back several months ago, and he filled us in. Of course, he's in the middle of London, or in East London, actually. He told us what it had been like to minister in the UK during COVID. I talked to Reverend Philip a bit before we came on. He's filled me in on a few things, but before we talk about your letter, each of you tell us sort of what your experience has been with your congregations, how they've done, and with the restrictions. Which local restrictions did each of you face? And Dr. Philip, if you want to go first.
Well, last spring, we faced the same restrictions right across the United Kingdom, which was a complete lockdown for nearly 4 months. Everything stopped. We weren't allowed to meet as congregations. We were allowed to broadcast services, so we quickly adapted to that. Did that in the early months. We were very keen, within a matter of weeks, when it became clear that the nature of the pandemic was not, going to be the devastating high mortality that was perhaps feared right at the very beginning. It became quite clear within a matter of weeks that, it was quite focused on, elderly people or people with, comorbidities and so on. So we were pushing quite early for churches in particular to be to be opened again. It was slower in Scotland than it was in the rest of the United Kingdom. We have a situation of devolved governments in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, and that actually has been quite a strange aspect of things this last year, because it's become a very political thing, and the different nations within the United Kingdom have sort of been vying with each other to show their kind of power and their their differential wisdom, if you like. So since last spring, things have become quite different in different places.
Why do you think the Scottish government has been more restrictive? Because we tend to think, scholars in this country will point to the individualism and concern for individual freedoms. A lot of that comes from and persists in the descendants of the Scotch-Irish. They are particularly hardy and independent, and want to have their want the freedom to do things their way. Is it simply political, or has there been some national, cultural, or mindset shift?
I think there's been a big cultural mindset shift in Scotland. That spirit that you're alluding to, I think, exists far more among Scots of the diaspora now than it does among Scots at home. The Scottish National Party has been ruling here now for a long time, and it likes, by definition, to do things differently to England. So if Boris Johnson decided one thing, then you could be sure that we would do something different, or at least we would do it a little bit later. There's been a lot of politicking going on there. So, yeah, I think we are much more statist, much more left-wing, much more looking to the government to decide everything. And I think Boris Johnson, supposedly at heart, is much more libertarian. I think he probably has been, in many ways, more uncomfortable with the government diktats, whereas I think our First Minister in Scotland is much more naturally authoritarian and has taken to that much better, and therefore has seemed to be a clearer leader, perhaps, because I think authoritarianism comes more naturally. So there's a whole host of factors, but we ended up from Christmas through till Easter this year with corporate worship being banned again, whereas the entire rest of the United Kingdom, that was not the case. And because of that, some of us ended up having to take the Scottish government to court to judicial review, which in fact we won on various grounds, on constitutional grounds, but also on grounds of disproportionate curtailing of human rights, according to the European Convention of Human Rights. So our government was shown to be in breach of the law, and I think that in England and Wales they probably knew that was going to be the case, and that was why they held back the second time. But in Scotland they were a bit more brazen about it.
What's been the reaction of your non-Christian secular neighbors to that stance? Do they think you're reckless, or do they actually appreciate the stand that you've taken?
It's difficult to tell across the board, but I would say we certainly had a lot of support from non-Christians and a lot of opposition from Christians. I think a lot of people felt that the government has overreached in all kinds of different ways, and I think they were glad to see Christian leaders actually taking a stand, and when nobody else would. But I think, unfortunately, we were a minority within the Christian church, and certainly among, also sadly, among evangelical churches. So we probably felt as though we had more opposition from other Christian leaders and churches than we did from the secular world, which was strange.
I learned about all this on the Irreverend, RREVEREND podcast, which is run by, I gather, evangelical Anglicans. And their stance here is real surprising to me, because if they are evangelical Anglicans, they're essentially state employees, and their stand is quite courageous, it seems.
Yeah, I think, well, they would probably describe themselves, I think, more as high church Anglicans, actually. But yeah, in many ways, we find very much that our stance has been akin to theirs.
So I know the ecumenical relations between what we would call the main line and the confessional sideline are probably more extensive in England, and I think that's just because Christians are just such an embattled minority, biblical Christians. And I know this goes right back to Lloyd Jones and Packer and Stott. There's always been more cooperation across lines, I think, there. And that's sometimes I think we overdo that in the U.S., or we're unwise with the way we do it. But I certainly understand why you all have to sort of stick together over there. Paul, tell us about your experience there in West London.
Yeah, it seems very soon. It's my children banging on the door trying to get in, but it seems strange looking back, isn't it? Like Willie, there was the great fear over what was going to come with the pandemic, and so we, followed the government guidelines and ceased meeting in person. At that point, I think we just didn't understand what we were facing. And so I think we expected it to be 3 to 4 weeks, and it ended up being 13 to 14. We had a man in the congregation, a father of 9, die from COVID very early on, which was very, very difficult. And so those weeks were just very strange weeks of broadcasting and all that sort of thing. We then, I think, kind of started back meeting in person in June. There were the restrictions of no singing, masks, social distancing, hands, face, space, and all that. And again, a lot of the congregation were very anxious and nervous and began to trickle back. We got to the stage in August where we felt we couldn't follow the guidance of no singing. And so again, what the government have done over the past years, they've really confused what is law and what is guidance. And that's been really difficult for congregations. And so, we began kind of people, what was the phrase everybody used, kind of sing quietly in your heart. And then, of course, some people begin to hum, and then they sing quietly, and then in the end it gets ridiculous, doesn't it? Everybody's singing, but we're not singing, and so we as elders felt that the government couldn't.
Well, you think rapping would have been an option? I mean, because chanting is just rapping slow, right?
Yeah, something like that, I'm sure. And so as elders, we just felt that there was just government overreach. It wasn't the place of government to tell churches that they couldn't sing and give guidance. And then, there was a difficult autumn. There was a second wave, or it might have been a third wave. And then in November, there were restrictions and imposed again for 4 weeks that churches were not supposed to meet. And we as elders made that a really difficult decision. We felt we couldn't obey the government at that point. And again, that was difficult in the congregation. There were those that disagreed with us, but they disagreed in a godly way. And the congregation has held together, but it's been stressful to try and lead through that. I'm really grateful for our elders. Everybody became an expert immunologist in the country. You would never have known that within the congregation and within the government there were such skills, and so everybody had an opinion. The news was just, we've been bombarded with this for a year.
Well, could they do worse than Neil Ferguson in their predictions?
Yeah. And again, it's a hard. Willie was a cardiologist and a doctor, so he's got more knowledge on this. But most of us ministers were clueless on a lot of this thing. And so you're leading kind of out of confidence. It was difficult not to start talking about things you've got no qualifications at all to talk about. and some of our evangelical conservative leaders, I felt let us down, and weren't speaking of I think weren't challenging the country nor those in authority and officials in a way that preachers of God's word need to. And so church leaders, to be honest with you, were just a total irrelevance. I think that's the one thing that I take from the last year and a half is as churches, we're very much on the outside of culture. We're classed with theatres, leisure facilities. We're not. The church in this country is seen as having no importance.
Yeah, and people who didn't know that before know it now, I suppose.
Yeah, and we've probably had a greatly inflated sense of our own importance for a long while, and I think this has been a bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah. So William, are you ever referred to as the Martin Lloyd-Jones of Scotland with your medical background?
I make no such claims.
So, how much did you lean on your medical knowledge as you were assessing these things? I mean, you didn't stand up and say, "Now, I'm a doctor now, and you have to listen to me." But I mean, was that helpful to you, or did it make it all the more stressful?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think it was helpful, but it did make it more stressful because, I find myself very quickly seeing that what was being dished out in the media was largely propaganda. There were so many holes in it, so many things not being said, so many things being spun. So I quickly discovered I had to get into the actual literature and data and real stuff myself. At least I was able to do that with a bit of discretion and understanding. And that was when I think I became more and more concerned because, the features that we all know of censorship or blocking out alternative viewpoints, of, the shutting down, the cancelling of very eminent, hugely experienced and qualified people who might have a viewpoint that was, in any way off narrative. I found that very chilling, very concerning. And so, I made it my business to delve into things a lot more deeply. And I think increasingly that meant that I find my views very much at variance to what was being dished out in the media and what most people were picking up. So I felt it was important for our congregation to help them cope by giving them a better insight on the truth. I mean, even things like the mortality figures. Very early on, it became quite clear that the vast majority of people who were getting seriously ill and dying were very elderly people or people who were already very sick and dying of something else. Whereas people were being terrified constantly that anybody who steps out of their door is likely to drop dead of COVID. And the weaponizing of fear, certainly in this country, has been very, very great and very, very concerning. So I was seeking early on to try and encourage our congregation not to be as fearful. Obviously, teaching them from God's word not to be fearful. I mean, I think the Lord's words in Luke 12 have been so important in this. Do not fear those who can kill the body and after that can do nothing else, but fear him who after having killed the body can cast your soul into hell. We were being told the opposite by the state. We were being told to be terrified constantly of that which can kill the body, but never mind anything about the judgment to come. And I felt it was very important for us to be saying, well, no, Christians must not fear that. Jesus tells us that. What we need to be fearing is our eternal perspective and is our soul right with God. But at the same time, it was also important to allay people's fears, which were quite misplaced, because this pandemic was not what it was being purported to be in the early stages. So having a medical insight was helpful, but it's not been easy, has it? Standing for truth and seeing truth when you find yourself more and more at variance with almost everything else you see and hear and read about all of this. And that's been a very striking thing this last year. And I think, it's just another aspect, isn't it, of the reality, as what Paul was saying, is that the church, the distance between the thinking of the church and the world is now very, very, very great in our culture. The greatest that's ever been in my lifetime on almost every issue.
Yeah, we might have thought that in a post-Christian culture that people would just say, life is meaningless, I don't care whether I live or die, devil may care. But I think what we found is, at least with manipulation or misinformation or mass hysteria, people can be made to be far too worried about death, and it's very materialist to think that physical life is all that matters. Preserving physical life, which is it's also odd that we took that tack, given abortion and the way some elderly people are essentially euthanized, and people are okay with that. So the value of life is not applied consistently in our cultures.
And in this as well, I mean, life has been considered in its most reductionist sense. I mean, one of the most horrific things here has been the treatment of people in nursing homes. I mean, obviously, early on, there were a lot of deaths in nursing homes, but, for over a year, 18 months, many people have been virtually prisoners inside a home, unable to see any of their relatives at all. And the average lifespan of somebody in a nursing home in this country is under 2 years. And so, many, many people have had, in order to supposedly save their life, have had everything that makes life meaningful completely robbed from them for virtually the rest of their physical life. And saving life has been reduced to just sort of keeping people with a heartbeat and a brainwave, rather than anything that actually makes life meaningful at all. And that's just another extraordinary inconsistency with all of this.
Richard Turnbull did some great lectures for the Christian Institute, which your watchers may well be interested in. But he talked about our culture baptizing longevity of life above everything else.
Yeah,
and I think that has been really clearly seen over this last while. I was on holiday and came back through the airport last week, and on the steps of Belfast Airport in Northern Ireland, it says, "Your safety is everything. Your safety is everything." And that is the strapline of our country at the minute. No, we don't want to be foolhardy. There are a lot of foolish people out there that have not thought of others. But when you make safety the thing of most paramount importance, you then breed a culture which is just fearful, and it's what we've seen for the last while.
Yeah, I think they call it elf and safety over there. I've heard a lot of. I'm a big watcher of British television, and I've been over a few times, but I picked up that lingo, and I think maybe we have what's called OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, but I think your equivalent and your government way of applying it is much more severe, even than our own. Now, let me ask you, I'm going to throw you a curveball. Growing up, did you all watch Last of the Summer Wine, the television show? So Paul didn't. Well, there's an interesting clip. I could play it. It's from the pilot, which is actually from '73. And
born.
Thanks for that. But in the pilot, the main character Clegg, it's so striking. The first time you see him, he's riding his bike to church on a weekday, and he grabs hold of the back of a hearse to tow his bicycle, and he rolls into the churchyard. And he comes, and I don't know if it's later it's revealed in the show that Clegg was chapel, which would be evangelical, independent. And I couldn't tell whether this was chapel or a C of E building, but he he walks to behind the church, sits on a bench with the vicar, and offers the vicar a cigarette. And the vicar says, "Well," he said, I'm supposed to be quitting." He says, "But it's hardly fitting for someone in my line of work to seem to be trying to live forever. In other words, to value, physical health and safety above everything." And I saw that recently, and I thought that's incredibly foreign to the new mindset. So a lot of people, they lament cultural Christianity, and we're glad cultural Christianity is gone. But in England, mid-century and even into the 70s and 80s, you still had people with Christian values and probably a Christian view of life and things eternal, whether they were faithful church members or not. But boy, things have really changed in that. So maybe I'll play that clip at the end after we're all done. But it's it was just striking. So the British stiff upper lip and the Scottish independent streak, they're in regression, I guess we could say. So back in April, you all composed a letter. I think you two were both involved, or you were principal signers. I was going to have it on the screen, but that was causing our technical problems earlier. So I'll keep that off the screen now. But it's the vaccine passport letter. I think we should say up front, and over here, everyone asks you if you're vaccinated. I'm not going to ask you all, and I don't care. But you can be for vaccines, but against vaccine mandates. And you can certainly be against vaccine passports. In other words, having to show your papers to go to use restaurants, public venues, and I think you all fear that could be applied eventually to church gatherings. So in April, you wrote a letter, and you've sort of open letter to the Prime Minister, and you've sort of re-upped it lately because of some talk. So tell us about the original letter and why it's important that you feel it's important to gather more signatures and publicize it again.
Well, the reason we've reopened it and resent it to the Prime Minister is because back then we were told and assured, there are no plans for this. But recently, it's not just become clear there are plans for it, but it's imminently been declared, and it will go before Parliament soon, in the beginning of September. So it's very much a live issue. The 3 points that we really made were, I could sum it up by saying the vaccine passports are illogical and irrelevant medically. They're immoral socially, and they're just quite impossible theologically. Let me take the first one. It's even more clear now than it was back in April that it is an entirely illogical and irrelevant thing to do. The vaccines seem to be, at least in the short term, effective in preventing severe disease and hospitalization and death and so on. But what is now very, very clear they are not is they're no good at stopping infection or transmission, particularly with some of the variants, like the Delta variant. So the fact is, if you go into a crowded venue, whether somebody has or hasn't been vaccinated doesn't make them any more or less dangerous at all. And because most people have been vaccinated, the sheer numbers mean that any risk to any person in that place is far more likely to come for a vaccinated person than an unvaccinated person. So it's totally and utterly meaningless to have vaccine passports at all. If the vaccines work, they've worked for you and they've protected you. There's no point in vaccine passports. If they don't work, well, there's still no point in vaccine passports. So it's pointless. But even if it wasn't pointless, we have major problems with the divisive nature of it, the discrimination that it brings into society, the real dangers that are there. A whole host of things, the surveillance issues, the coercion of people to get things simply so they're able to do normal tasks, the creation of a sort of underclass who you keep out of things, and then even worse, you begin to blame for any ills and infections that do happen. I mean, there's just a whole host of things there that are are hugely damaging to society. And then the third thing, which really, because we were churchmen, were the biggest issues for us, and that is just this theological impossibility of closing the doors of churches in the faces of people who are seeking the gospel and seeking the fellowship of Christ and his people, because they can't prove some sort of health status. So that was the three things. Paul, you maybe want to pick up on that last one in particular, because that was the biggest thing for all of us.
Yeah, that's right, isn't it? And so church, the very nature of the gospel, it is for all, isn't it? All you who are weary and heavy laden, not all you who are weary and heavy laden and have been vaccinated. And so our churches are open, and our churches are full of people who are vulnerable, so you have people with mental health issues, and we want to welcome them, people that have great concerns. I think I was chatting with some people yesterday. Take-up of the vaccine is still much lower amongst the Black community and amongst the Asian community.
Same here. Yeah, African Americans are the least vaccinated class.
And so I just think the government have just got to be very careful in creating something that is unfair and discriminatory. Within churches, we want those who, whether you take the vaccine or not is a conscience issue. I don't think a minister has got a place in telling people that what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing in that sense. But as churches, the doors must remain open. And the last year, I think that we've seen a number of times the government, through law, but also through guidance, have just overreached. And when it comes to vaccine passports, that cannot be allowed.
Yeah, in the U.S., because we're so large, and because I think what we've seen is a reemergence of appreciation for federalism, because some states have been much better than others, and but now we're even down to localities like New York, New Orleans, Los Angeles, being very much more restrictive than other areas. That can be good if we need to adjust for actual case, pandemic dynamic reasons. But it's still. Someone said to me, "Why do you care about these mandates in California?" I said, "Well, there are Christians there. There are, love of neighbor can actually compel us, not to hunker down in our homes, but to want freedom for our neighbors, to make choices. But then again, there have been states like Texas, Tennessee, where I am, Florida, who've been very South Dakota, been very as open as can be, and so we in the U.S. in particular, we can sort of be fat and happy and enjoy our freedom in one state, but and then forget about people elsewhere. But I think that's hard to do. So have you all noticed more of a common concern across different parts of the UK because of this? I mean, is it building fellowship and commonality between evangelicals and maybe some others, or is it or is it just all bad?
I think it's. I'm sure, William. There have been some strange bedfellows you find yourself with over the last year, and emails come in from the places where you never expect. I think it's been depressing. I think that many conservative evangelicals have just not seen the issue. I think for a lot of us, we had not thought through issues of church and state as clearly as we should have, and that's helped us in this past year, I think, to really kind of do the hard work on that. People have kind of gone to Romans 13 as if Romans 13 is the only verses in the Bible that speak about relations. And so there have been those, William has good links with the Irreverent podcast. They would not be conservative evangelicals by any stretch. But on this have been very helpful. I've had a number of contacts in the last couple of weeks from local Roman Catholics who are just really just distressed by how their priests have kind of handled things.
Yeah.
Within the charismatic movement, again, it's been strange. The kind of people who've contacted us and been really thankful, and so yes, on one level, I think that there's been a greater unity, but on another level, I think it's been sad, and that there's people who I thought would be stronger, and lead that haven't. I think within congregations as well, it's been hard for leaders, and you would have just hoped for a little bit more willingness to take the flak amongst church leaders. Would that be fair, Willie?
I think it has been an extraordinarily divisive issue among Christians. Perhaps the most divisive in strange sort of ways that that any of us can remember. And I think that has made it very difficult for church leadership, because people have wanted not to divide their congregations. And therefore, I think that has meant that a lot of leaders have not been willing to lead. Have just been willing to follow, or tried to follow, but have tried to follow what is a very divided congregation, and you're then torn in all sorts of different ways, and it's very difficult. I think that these are the situations where giving a lead means that you will inevitably face a backlash, and so that's very difficult for people to do. And I think all of those that I know where churches where leaders have taken a lead, there has been a backlash to some degree, but nevertheless, I think those churches are actually much more united, and will be much more united in the future than those where that hasn't happened. So I think it has been extremely difficult, but it's difficult times that requires leadership. And I think that we've been let down badly by national leaders. I mean, it's been hugely embarrassing in this country. Last summer, I remember reading within the space of a week or two several opinion pieces in national daily newspapers by commentators, atheist commentators, saying, where is the spiritual leadership in the time of national crisis? And there wasn't any. The churches and national leaders been hiding, and that was what eventually brought about the first letter that we wrote to the Prime Minister. I mean, it was a conversation that Paul and I had, just despairing about that and saying, well, look, people in the churches need to hear that some church leaders somewhere actually have views on this and are willing to say something. And we were surprised, pleasantly, I think, weren't we, when we drafted that first letter to the Prime Minister and very quickly got, hundreds and hundreds of signatures. And that said to us that at grassroots level, there were many Christians who were very frustrated and were looking for a voice that was not being given by the sort of national leaders who ought to be. So I think the encouragement has been that in some ways, the voice of the real church is beginning to be heard a little more. The media are starting to go to people who are actually leaders of real churches and are willing to speak out, because these national leaders actually have nothing to say or don't want to say anything. And in a sense, that's good, because people are hearing perhaps from real churches for the first time, rather than from denominational bureaucrats who actually don't really speak for the church. Mm-hmm. So there's been pluses and minuses, but it's been a very, I think for church leaders, it's been a very tough time. I think we all feel that.
Yeah, it's so political here. You can imagine with the 2016 and 2020 elections. There's this myth that evangelicals are the least vaccinated. Well, that's not really true. And if you're against vaccination, it's almost like you're declaring your undying love for Donald Trump and for the supposed insurgency, rebellion that we had back in January. And
that's strange, isn't it? Because Donald Trump was the one who wanted warp speed vaccine.
Yeah, that's right, and he got it. So yeah, that's and you had Democratic leaders last fall saying, I'm not going to take the Donald Trump vaccine. And now you have conservatives who are probably not taking it because they now associate, of course, they should associate the heavy-handed marketing spin pressure with the government, because that's where it's coming from. That's fair. But whether that's a reason to do something or not is another question. And in this country, I mean, what struck me, you all are speaking out much more strongly than almost anybody I've heard in the U.S. Now, you're always going to have some fringy, I'm not going to say far right, but usually independent evangelicals who have made a sort of political issue out of this on their own, and maybe are building a brand or trying to flex their muscles. I don't see that in what you all are doing, but it's still very strong. So as you look to the U.S., I mean, what are your impressions of the church's response in the U.S.? Because I really think what you're doing is probably more impressive than anything I've seen over here.
I don't know the US very well. That's a great cop-out, isn't it?
Well, that's good. Just you haven't wasted your life following our scene.
I don't like we picked up a little bit of what John MacArthur had done and some of his things, which seemed very, very impressive. But again, I don't know enough. I think it is. If you're leading a brand and you have an awful lot of kind of plates to spin and you're having to raise lots of money to keep things going, you're going to be very reluctant to make a difficult stand, isn't it? And I suspect there are some ministries like that, but I don't know enough of the church situation in the US really to comment. Some of John MacArthur, not all of it, but some of John MacArthur's stuff was very helpful. But yeah, what about that's as much wisdom as my government.
Yeah, it's. I mean, certainly we can see the politicizing of things in the States. I think that is more extreme probably than here, because we've got the interesting situation whereby we've got supposedly a libertarian prime minister and a conservative party that has been actually imposing all these draconian lockdowns, and the much more statist Labour Party in opposition, but not opposing the government at all, just supporting them. In fact, if the only opposition they would want to give is that things went even further. I think it would have been a very different situation had Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party won the last election, and had they been doing this, I think the Conservative opposition would have opposed, and we would have a very, very different situation. So there's almost political unity here. The opposition to the government has come from a handful of their own side's MPs and a scattering of independents. There's been almost political unanimity. You can't really find much difference between the parties. So that's a difference, I think, perhaps from the States. The reluctance of the church to speak, I think, has been just very puzzling, and I think that it has been evidence of the extraordinary power of the mainstream media and social media, and the capture of the whole of society by a narrative of fear. I think it has been extraordinarily successful in a way that I've never seen in my whole lifetime. And so it's very difficult for anybody to speak out against that, because when people are frightened, they look for leadership from their national leaders, and they're almost willing to do anything to be protected. And I think it's just been an extraordinarily strange situation. I mean, normally in a crisis, in a wartime and so on, the government wants to dispel fear and encourage and keep the population, in good spirits. This has been the first time in my lifetime when the government has wanted to subjugate everybody with complete fear. And so I think that's been a huge factor in this. And I think I think that's where the church perhaps has been found wanting, because so many people are captured by the narrative, and it's not clear to people. You know, we faced as a congregation and others like us a very difficult time when we had to leave our denomination, and we had a lot of work to do in the congregation. We ended up very united, but there were some people, you know, who disagreed. But in some senses, it was easier because you could point very clearly to scriptures that said, you know, this issue is wrong. You know, the Bible teaching on marriage and sexuality and so on is very clear on that. I think on this issue, you know, there's no chapter you can go to that says this is how you respond to a pandemic. The issue has been much less clear for people, and as Paul said, people have homed in on one or two simplistic things like Romans chapter 13, and I think that's made it very difficult for us, because people can quote a verse at you which seems to settle the matter in a simplistic way, and I don't think it does. But it requires the arguments we've had to give to critique things require theology, require a wider biblical framework and understanding, and that's always much more difficult, isn't it, than just being able to point to a verse. And we live in the age of sound bites and Twitter, and you know, you can't do theology by Twitter and sound bites.
Paul, what's your take on that?
Yes, I think follow on that. As none of us like to stand out, do we? I shy away from suffering. I shy away from being kind of the odd one out. And I think in this past kind of 18 months, there's just been a kind of growing awareness in my heart that as Christians, we there are times when we have to stand. There are times when we're on the outside of culture, and we have to prepare our people and prepare our children for that. And you know, I think we've probably not done that. We've not done the job in preparing our people for that. But that is the nature of Christianity, isn't it? I've suddenly become aware, I think, of just what it potentially may cost, and what it's going to take to stay faithful to the gospel's message. And that's not to say that churches that have taken a different view on some of these things, they're unfaithful, and that I wouldn't want to go and say on that. But I do think now is the time to stand, and our young people and our children need courage, and we need to model that to them. It's unthinkable, isn't it, that in the next 10, 20 years that there are not going to be more issues where, as Christians, we're going to come into conflict with the state, and particularly with the media and the mainstream view. And none of us rejoice at that, but we've got to be ready for that, and we've got to start doing that. And we cannot expect our children to stand when we've not been willing to.
Yeah, that's an important point. This is, I don't know, maybe you're considered a conspiracy theorist if you say, well, this is all planned and this is a trial run. But it is a trial run, in a sense. It is going to set a precedent. The fact that you all in Scotland sued the government, that set an important precedent that was helpful. But people getting used to these things and accepting them, that's a precedent. And I think, I think I've even seen private quotes reported that we can't believe we got away with all this. We can't believe that people were as compliant as they were. So, yeah, we have a lot of work to do in the church to teach on these issues, but and also to prepare for the future. I mean, it's never wrong to do the right thing, but it's important to get this right for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And you all may hear my dog crying to get out. He spotted a rabbit out the window.
I think just on that, many people will be familiar with Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies. And his thesis that the West is being taken over by soft totalitarianism, as he calls it, and that the church has to recognize that that is the case, and that therefore there has to be resistance. And he takes his cue from those who lived under the hard totalitarianism of communism and so on. And I think, having read that book, it struck me that the people who see things much more clearly at the moment are those who lived in the former Eastern Europe. They see what's gone on in COVID, and what frightens them is not the virus, but is all the responses that have happened, and precisely what you said, that people have accepted them so readily and so willingly. And I think that really is a wake-up call for the church, because the next time that we're told, well, you're not allowed to worship because of public safety or this or that or the next thing, what are we going to do? Have we ceded the principle now that we are no more important than a tanning salon or a bingo hall or whatever? I think we allowed ourselves far too easily to be classed as a non-essential service, and the damage done by that is going to be very, very difficult to recover, if ever. And I think what scares me far more is what this period and all that's been done and all that we have accepted, what that means for the future. And I think if the church has to really seriously think through that now. And vaccine passports is one aspect of that. If we accept that, that's another enormous step towards essentially saying that the church is controlled entirely by the state. And, how far down that road can you go before that is completely the end? So for me, one of the things we have to learn from this is that we made a mistake. We've recovered what we can, but we must not make that mistake again. And if we accept vaccine passports as a requirement for church, I think that is going to be a step far too far. So we will not do that. I cannot do that. And I don't believe that any church should do that. And I would very much want to encourage Christian leaders everywhere to say, this is a line we will not cross.
Yeah, the work you all have done has been very good. It's been inspiring. I shared it on an elders group for PCA elders, and someone quickly said that they thought we should copy it more or less and do our own version. We haven't done that yet, but I also have some inner change with some Christian libertarian groups, and they've been very encouraged by your letter, and they've shared it as well. So we do appreciate the difficulty that you all face, but we appreciate the work that you've done on this. Well, normally Presbycast goes for a long time, like an hour and a half. We record at night. We won't do that today. I've got to get to work, and you all probably need to eat lunch. You both look fit, like you couldn't stand to miss a meal. I could, but I'm not sure you can. Paul, anything you want to say? If people come to London as tourists, if that ever happens again, they can come worship with you.
You'd be very welcome, even without a vaccine passport. You'd be very welcome indeed.
What's the nearest tube stop to your church?
So the nearest tube stop is Ealing Broadway and the on Northfields, and the nearest train stop is West Ealing, which you can get a train from Heathrow in 20 minutes. So if you get into Heathrow, come and see us. Pop in. We'd love to see you.
So we could just fly over there, go to church, and then fly back out.
Yeah, you could fly to Glasgow, and if Scotland ever allows you in again, but you could fly to Glasgow and see Willie. Yeah.
I have one memory of Glasgow, Reverend Philip. I was there with a student tour, and I had a young man who was a college student following me around, and we ran to beat a bus that was coming across the road, and he followed my lead. He was one step behind me, and he escaped death by about 6 inches. So every time I think of Glasgow, I think of the young man I nearly killed.
He did better than lots of people in Glasgow.
Yeah. Glasgow's a gritty town. I don't know if it's sort of like the Pittsburgh of the UK or
No. It's the cultural capital of the Northern Hemisphere. Come and visit us. We'll show you.
Well, it's different from Edinburgh. I'm quite sure. The next street over from my street is Edinburgh, but everyone says Edinburgh, which it's very grating. But I do know how to say that word. But yeah.
Well, I was born and raised in Edinburgh, but I have now taken what everybody in Glasgow says is the only good thing to come out of Edinburgh, and that is the train to Glasgow.
Well, it's good to have competition in that way. Well, thanks for joining us. We do appreciate it a great deal, and we are concerned for you. Appreciate your concern for us, and we really are connected. We are connected doctrinally with you all, and we know that we'll spend eternity with you as well. So may as well become concerned for each other now. So thanks for joining us. Give your regards to your congregants and fellow believers there in Scotland and London. So thank you, and hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
All right.
My friend, without the Lord, you get nothing at all. Life's been a demon, but credit all is wrong. Don't waste your life, don't toss it away. You can know real life for today. Yield to God, let Him have His way. Don't waste your life, my friend. You will lose in the end.
Met on the internet worldwide.